welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by a writer of romantic fiction, romantic comedies across a number of types of stories. And the book that we are here to discuss is going to be one of my favorite reads of this summer. I already know, even though the summer is very young, and I am so excited to talk about it. So hello, welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, my name is Kirsty Greenwood, and my book is The Love of My Afterlife, which is a romantic comedy out this summer.
It's, oh my gosh, such a fun story. And I'd love if we could start out talking a little bit about your career and your journey to this book. You have written in the romance genre before, but if I'm correct, is this your first sort of supernaturally tinged one, or?
I mean, the first one, my debut, was a kind of magical rom-com. So it's about a woman who is hypnotized into telling the truth whenever she's asked a question. So very similar to Liar Liar by Jim Carrey kind of premise. And I always wanted to write magical rom-coms. When I wrote that, it was 2011, and they weren't as popular as they are now. So as soon as I got the chance to write another magical supernatural rom-com, I was like, yes, okay, this is my time, this is my moment.
Excellent. Yeah, it is so much fun. I'm going to say that a lot. I apologize in advance for repetitive.
Never apologize. That's great. Thank you.
Could we talk a little bit about our protagonist, Delphi? I was just saying before the show that I loved her so much. She really resonated with me. I felt like I shared a lot of her fears and her perhaps, weaknesses. It starts with her death, which is not really usually where stories start. So,
No.
tell us a little bit about crafting her and where she finds herself at the beginning of the story.
So Delphi was born out of an experience I'd had before moving to London. I was living in a small village. I've always been quite introverted, and I came to London and I realized that I had to make some new friends um, in order to be the best person I could be. I was very insular and quite lonely. And I resisted that so much. I cocooned myself and I was nervous to get out there and meet people. And it just got me thinking, what kind of thing it would get, like someone who was worse than me, someone who was even more stubborn and curmudgeonly than me, what would it take to get them out of their comfort zone? And I thought it would literally be a life or death scenario for some people. Um, and I liked the idea of having this kind of grumpy protagonist, and the grumpiness is a defense mechanism, for sure. And just kind of pairing her with someone like the character of Merit, who is completely sunshiny and very open and, brave and courageous, and putting those two together as like a kind of odd couple friendship. I thought that would make for good comedy and good emotions. But I think, yeah, Delphi was definitely based on my own experiences, trying to make friends as an adult.
Yeah, it is very difficult to make friends as an adult, especially if you sort of, have the past experience that Delphi has, because she's bringing a lot
Yes,
of pain and perhaps like trauma into the situation. Um,
exactly.
so it starts with like a rather undignified death, unfortunately. And I was noticed it too that she is in the 27 Club now with Jim Morrison and Jimi
Oh
Hendrix.
gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd not realized that.
Yeah. Um, could you talk a little bit about building Evermore, where our story starts, and perhaps your vision of soulmates? Because I really, really appreciated your sort of like expansive, generous view of soulmates, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think in terms of the afterlife, I think I took the opportunity to really lean in to whatever my imagination threw at me. which is, I'm sure, a culmination of books I've read and movies I've watched and things that I've just thought to myself about what the afterlife might be like or what I would like it to be like. So I just really had at it with my imagination in terms of building Evermore and what kind of environment would also suit Merritt as a character and which kind of environment would also make Delphi the most uncomfortable. I personally think that there are multiple soulmates, romantic and platonic, in the world. I mean, I've written books about soulmates where it's just very much like these two people are meant to be. But I also like the idea that it's, people change. Who might be your soulmate when you're 20 could be different than when you're 65. And I like the idea that you have all of those opportunities throughout your life to make these huge connections, not just romantically, but with friends as well, which I think Delphi does in this book. She has the big romance, but she also has she meets these soulmate friends who are going to be in her life for a very long time.
I really love that the the romantic journey is given equal attention to both her friendship journey and her personal journey, I think.
Yeah.
Um, could you talk about building the supporting cast? Because Merritt, I love. I always love the character who is like the fan of the genre that the story is,
Yeah.
and she's such a great version of that. Could you talk about maybe who was your favorite to write and who was the most challenging to write?
Oh, I think I think Merritt was my favorite to write because she has the same love for romance books as I do and the same slightly obsessive nature. And I also liked the idea that, I liked that she was so pushy and blunt. That's not a way that people really get to behave in real life. And I liked kind of channeling that side of myself into her so she could say whatever she liked. And she was just joyful and she was just always on the hunt for fun. And the idea of, her greatest wish is to see a romance novel play out in real life, mine too. Like when I see people on the street, I'm always like, what's the story? And are those two people in love? Are they on a first date? How long have they been together? I love all that. Um, and the most difficult to write, mm, I think possibly Delphi, because even though her voice came naturally, because it was born out of a lot of my own experiences, I found it, there were some moments that were quite painful to kind of recollect on my own past in order to kind of grab those feelings and make them real on the page. So, even though she came naturally and things get better for her as the story goes on, there are definite moments where I had to like reach into my own traumas, so to speak. It is a romantic comedy. But to make that real. So that I did find that quite tricky, but hopefully it's resulted in a more rounded and real feeling character for the readers.
Absolutely. She feels very real. And like she feels real in a way that I think speaks to some like maybe more tired rom-com tropes, especially that you see in film. Like Delphi is socially clumsy.
Yes.
Whereas like
Same.
you think of the like Sandra Bullock, in Miss Congeniality, like our kind of
Yeah.
idealized rom-com protagonist is usually like physically clumsy. Like she hurts no one but herself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like Delphi sort of has impact on the people around her, and that feels very real and very raw. And I think that like talking about crafting her, you've touched upon a thing that I think like I'm a sort of born again rom-com fan, and I have to admit this usually in my interviews is that like as a teenager I had a sort of like oh, I'm not that kind of girl, I don't like rom-coms, and then I had an
Yes.
awakening later in life.
What did you like to read as a teenager?
I was all about Stephen King as a teenager.
Oh,
Like,
nice. Oh, that's much cooler, to be fair. Like, or it is as a teenager. I mean, now it's all about romance, but yeah, Stephen King. It's still on the commercial fiction train. It's not like you were, you were reading all those like, worthy kind of classic tomes and being like, oh yeah, I really understand this. I really like this.
I only read Paradise Lost, like, but and I think something that made romance hard for me is that it involves a lot of vulnerability,
Yes.
and that's something that you also get to see Delphi experiment with, because she is very defensive and very guarded when the story starts, and
Yeah,
yeah, crafting that emotional journey is very, very resonant, and I imagine yeah, makes you feel vulnerable as well. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I find a lot of humor in um vulnerability, as well as pain. I think some of the funniest moments are the darkest moments. And, as someone who has experienced pain in the past, sometimes the only thing you can do to get through it is to laugh at the absurdity of some of the situations in which you find yourself. So I really liked kind of putting that into Delphi. And I think even though she is defensive, she she does see the humor in the situation, which I think is, a way that I can relate to her as well.
Let's talk a little bit about writing London, if that's okay. It's also like a really lovely sort of it's so trite to say like a love letter to the city, but it kind of is. Like you get to
Kind
see
of
a
is,
lot
yeah.
of it. And you get to see experience a lot of the different um maybe like some of the things that we associate with London, perhaps globally, and some of the more like off the beaten path, sort of like less known things to like an American like me who has visited 3 times, so
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about writing the city, how you chose, your settings for scenes and stuff like that?
Of course. So I moved to London and from a small village in the north, and I literally like I think 2 months after I moved there to Paddington, which is where the book is set, I started writing. I was so taken with where I'd moved to. As areas go and neighborhoods go in London, Paddington is kind of seen as not really a neighborhood because it's like the center where there's a station and there's lots of tourists about, but it felt like a hidden gem to me, and everyone around there was in a good mood because they were all visiting from another country. So they weren't there to do the touristy stuff in Paddington, but that's where they were starting their days. So they would go out in the morning and they would go and get a coffee and they would be planning what they were going to do in London that day. And everyone was so happy to be there. And it was lovely, and it was summer, and I was recovering from an illness and starting to get back to myself. And so I was completely inspired by London and just the feeling of how magical it was. And I don't know if some of that was my relief at finally feeling better after being sick. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I still feel like London is one of the most magical places in the world. Um, so I wanted kind of Delphi to experience, because she's lived there her whole life and she's just stayed around, these 4 streets and never ventured. I wanted her to kind of be forced almost, because she needed to be forced into experiencing London like a tourist and seeing it through eyes of, this is magical. There are some really magical places here. And even the places that, are a little grotty or, a little edgy, there is enjoyment in seeing that and experiencing it. Um, but yeah, I'm like obsessed with this city. And I hope that people who read the book, if they've not visited London, would feel like they got, a pretty good overview of what it's like.
I think you do. And something that it made me think about is that London really does feel like several different cities cobbled together sometimes. Like New
Yeah.
York also can feel that way, but there's just like a
Yeah.
much larger time frame on which London has sort of been cobbled together. Um, and I think that resonates really nicely with the sort of like also the themes of like chosen family or found family, is that these are people
Yeah.
you weren't necessarily born to or born with, but have all come together and for their own reasons, and are sort of making this like beautiful, diverse whole. It's really a lovely sort of resonance there.
Absolutely. I agree.
So could you talk a little bit about what is on the horizon for you? I know that sometimes things are not able to be talked about yet, if they're in development, but what is on your sort of writerly horizon?
So I am writing my next book, and it's called Sexy Spooky Love Story. And it's set in the Scottish Highlands. And I can't say too much about it because I'm in the midst of drafting it and it could change, but it features a woman who goes back to her hometown in the Scottish Highlands, where she is staying with her childhood enemy, who used to be a complete geek and is now very, very, of course, very, very handsome and, delightful. And she's also haunted by the ghost of her teenage best friend, who is horrified at what a stick in the mud her pal has become. So there's lots of hijinks and romance and dramatic scenery in the Scottish Highlands. Um, and I am just absolutely loving writing it. I think seeing how people have responded to the love of my afterlife, I think it's given me a little burst of confidence to lean into my own voice and really just have fun, because that's the way I approached the love of my afterlife was, really just write what I want to read. Um, and it's so gratifying now that people are having this response to it. So I feel very buoyed up about the next one.
That's great. Well, I hope that you will consider maybe coming back to talk about that one when it's in the
Of
world.
course,
Right.
I would love to.
And I have one more question. I saw on your website that you are working on a rom-com musical. Is that true?
It is true. It is true. Like, musical theatre is the love of my life. I adore it. And I'm part of a musical theatre workshop called BML in the UK, where it's one of the things actually I did to make new friends when I moved here. Um, and it's great because some of the people I hang out with the most are, fellow musical theatre nerds, and we go to see shows together. So I'm there as a lyricist and I collaborate with a number of different musicians. And yeah, I'm working on a couple of musicals at the moment. Romantic comedies, always, because I think they make the best musicals, and I think the very best musicals that exist are, whether or not they're officially termed as romantic comedies, I think they are. Um, yeah, so that is what I do in my downtime, is I scribble songs, and yeah, I love it. I love it.
That's cool. Is that a new way of writing for you? Because I imagine musical writing is like very collaborative because you are working with other people who are handling other parts of it. Has that,
Yeah.
I guess, been different from your general approach to novel writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's nice, especially about lyric writing, is you get the emotional reward of having written something very quickly. I think, with a novel, you really have to just buckle in for the long haul, and you don't really have a take on how good or bad it is until the end, until you've sent it to an editor or an agent, or a beta reader. Whereas I think with musical theatre, and with writing lyrics, it's such a short process, and the perimeters of what you have to achieve are quite limited. So you have a better gauge of how well you've done, so that's definitely a quicker reward, which I'm all for. As someone with ADHD, I need I need my praise instantly and my reward instantly. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've with the book, it's quite similar. That's a long haul, but because it's mostly dialogue, which is my favorite part of writing novels anyway, it's nice. It's like you have to be more economical with your words, which is a interesting challenge. I don't necessarily feel as comfortable writing musicals as I do with novels because I'm, far more experienced at writing novels. Um, but I do really enjoy it. It's nice to kind of stretch those different muscles.
Nice. Well, I'm going to follow that very avidly and curiously. I think that sounds really great. And
Are
thank
you
you.
into musicals?
I am. I don't have breadth, I have depth. So I'm only into like
Yeah.
3 or 4 musicals, but I am into them.
Yes. Which ones?
Les Mis, uh,
Yes.
Hadestown. Um,
Yes.
I came of age in the 90s, so Rent.
Rent, of
Yeah.
course, of course. Oh,
And
brilliant.
like My Fair Lady. So
Oh, My Fair Lady, yes. Well, this is it, is like this is what I like about, it's similar with the romance fandom as well, is when the readers are into something, they really are, like they're deep into it. They're voracious, which I love. That's how I feel about things that I love.
I do love the romance community, and I love the relationships that seem to exist between authors and their fans. It's like a very like dynamic community, and I feel like it's a very close one. Like there's a lot of online spaces for creators to talk to their fans and fans to talk
Yeah.
to each other. Like it is like a real community, and it's very nice.
It's lovely, and it doesn't feel like there's kind of there's not that much separation, I don't think, between readers and authors. It feels like we're all kind of like the same, we're all, obsessed with this genre and in love with the whole thing. And yeah, it doesn't feel, it doesn't feel separate. It doesn't feel like when I was younger you would have to, mail in a letter to a writer's agent. It's lovely now that you can just slide into someone's DMs and, and fangirl, which I have been known to do.
Me too. Oh gosh, well, this has been really lovely. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I meant it. If you want to come back to talk about sexy, spooky love story, that sounds great.
I would love to. Thank you.
Problem. Okay, listeners, now it's your turn. Please check out The Love of My Afterlife. It is just such a delightful book. I meant to make it last for several days, but that just didn't happen, and I stayed up reading it all in one night. So when you are listening to this, it will be out in the world. So go to your favorite independent bookstore or library, wherever you like to go for books. Okay, it's time to close this chapter. Bye-bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.